adjust the frames. Got keys to kingdom, unlocking chains. Sober the podcast, open up your brains. Sober the podcast, let's get it, man. Yeah.
Welcome back to season 4 of Sober the Podcast with your host Bradley Saxon. And I'm riding solo dolo today. My partners are not here, but that's okay because we're going to continue talking about step 3 of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, as this whole season has been a journey walking through the first 164 pages of, yes, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And, last episode was, in my opinion, one of the most powerful ones we've done thus far. Getting into the spiritual malady, getting into the part of the illness, which is the root of all our troubles, right? We've talked about in step 1, the problem concerning alcoholism of the mind and the body, the mental obsession, allergy of the body, okay? But in step 3, what we find on page 60 is that the spiritual malady gets its name. And obviously, the name of the spiritual malady on page 60 is self-will. And we've been talking about this 4-letter word, S-E-L-F, self, as, we've been talking about it in a way that I feel like could help people understand to understand what this word is, how it relates to my life, how it can create trouble in my life. And I think we've talked about it in such a negative connotation that when we try to help people understand that self is God-given, therefore good, it tends to help them understand a little more about how this is something that we're not trying to completely get rid of, but we're trying to get it back to its rightful size, and we're trying to get it under the authority of God, God's provision, so that through what He created in us, He could now remanage it to use it to create a quality of life. Because I know when I used to think about the word self, I really had this like icky feeling, about it, because I thought it was just bad. But as I was mentored and sponsored in Alcoholics Anonymous, I started to understand that self is actually God-given, therefore good. We've just tried to manage it, and it's come out in many destructive ways because it's not under the ownership or the leadership or the provision of the creator of it. So we left off talking about in the last episode what the spiritual malady actually looks like, because you'll hear a statement sometimes, and I don't know if you have, but I've heard it for many years. I learned it many, many decades ago. But it's this statement: self can't see self. And so often it takes someone else to help us see something that we can't see. For illustration, how many times have people been able to smell bad breath, but the person with the bad breath can't smell it? Well, it's interesting that the person with the bad breath can't smell it when their nose is like a half an inch or an inch away from their mouth, yet the person that's sitting 3 foot can smell it. And so it's the idea of there is this aroma that comes off our life that is selfish and self-centered that we can't always see, that community and mentorship is often the mirror to help us see the things that God wants to correct in this season of our life, right? And so since self can't see self, or you can't see particularly the spiritual malady, you can see its common manifestations, right? And so self has manifestations, and that's what we've been sort of illustrating over the last episode of sort of what that looks like when it's being fleshed out. And I remember us getting to the end of the part where we're talking about the alcoholic is like an actor who wants to run the whole show, ever trying to arrange the ballets, the lights, the scenery, the players in his own way, and seeing that if he can keep this play going in the direction that he wants it to, that life would be great, right? And we found that in doing this, our actor can be quite virtuous, right? He could be mean, egotistical, selfish, dishonest. On the other hand, if it don't go his way, or he can be, selfless and modest and self-sacrificing. On the other hand, when things don't go its way, he can be mean, egotistical, selfish, and dishonest, right? And so we've lived this double life prior to getting into recovery, right? We've played God. We've tried to rearrange life to suit ourselves. And this is where you're starting to find out the part of the illness that has to be treated, right? When you learn about the illness of the body, the allergy, you learn about the mental obsession. These two things are called illness of the body, illness of the mind. Don't necessarily like that statement because it almost sounds like these two have a plan of treatment, which they don't. So, in all actuality, I like to think that the spiritual malady is the problem, obsession of the mind, allergy of the body, symptoms, right? And so we don't treat the allergy of the body, we don't treat the mental obsession. These are the two things that can return if the spiritual malady isn't treated, right? So, this is the part of the illness that we treat. And so, step three made a decision to turn our will and life over to the care of God as we understood Him, is the beginning of a course of action that we will take to bring self back down to size, let God become the central fact of our life so that we can start being inspired by the Holy Spirit. The big book calls it a vital sixth sense. So as we're being led by the Spirit, now we can transform our mind, change our altitude per se, and grow spiritually. And this is the way that we have found in Alcoholics Anonymous for 90 years has helped men return from the gates of insanity and death. Like men that at one time you thought, if I don't put him in a jail cell, throw away the key, he'll never get sober. Like these are the kind of hopeless, seemingly hopeless conditions that men have picked up their mats and walked away from because of this simple program of action. And so I just want to recap a little bit before we dive into step 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I mean, obviously, we're really understanding jumping into this. We're on like a year journey of, walking didactically through this, trying to make sure we hit details, trying to make sure that we allow our experience, strength, and hope to potentially answer questions that you have that we don't know that you have. So I am wanting to recap so that we make sure that we stay on course. So step 1, problem. Step 2, solution. Statements. That's all it is. Statement of the problem, statement of the solution. Now, step 3, we're learning about self. We're learning about what self is. And we're learning about turning our will and life over to the care of God, right? And so in doing that, what we find is in the wall statement or the wall step that I just read to us, made a decision to turn our will. We got to understand the most important word in that step is to. The word to is in the unabridged dictionary means to begin. So back to the illustration we used prior episode about the 3 frogs on the log, 2 decide to jump off. How many's left? Well, there's still 2 frogs. Why? Because we don't know they jumped until they jump. And so step 3 is always just going to be a resolution unless we find a man right in the 4th step. It says, next we launched out on a vigorous course of action, the first of which is a personal house cleaning that many of us have never attempted, right? And so we have to understand that in the beginning when I thought, based on my understanding through church, and I've broadened my understanding over the years through study, through pain, through counsel, is that this idea of my experience with God being like a burning bush experience was one that sort of had to subside because I was more of an educational variety experience to where I changed a little bit over time. And so it helped me to understand step 3 more because I almost envisioned I was sitting in a chair, and in step 3, when I took it, I sort of was like, and in that moment, I feel like I thought I turned it all over to God. And at the end of the day, that's just not my experience, right? And I needed to understand in step 3, the only thing I was doing was making a decision to take the next step. And then somewhere along the lines of steps 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and adopting 10, 11, and 12, I begin to see change in my life, right? Because a lot of times I think we envision that God's going to do a very big thing, when in my experience, he does do a big thing over time, but the big thing is usually a very small thing multiple times. And then as I, from hindsight, get away from those experiences, I look back and see the big thing was a bunch of little bitty experiences I had through making small changes daily in my life. And so this understanding of step 3 and embracing the journey revolutionized my life, because I wasn't always every day looking for God to do this very huge thing. I was actually trying not to miss him in the small things. And that has literally probably continued to be my journey and how I experience the presence of God. So step 3 is just this understanding that selfishness, self-centeredness is the root of my troubles. Driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-pity, we step on our toes of our fellows and they retaliate. They hurt us seemingly without provocation. We find that somewhere in the past we made decisions based on self that later place us in a position to be hurt, right? So what we're starting to understand is one of the manifestations of a man that's running in self-will is resentment. And resentment is the manifestation of someone that is depending upon people or placing unrealistic expectations upon people to meet needs that God gave them. Now think about this. If the needs are God-given, then the needs can only be met by God. But when you are born dead on arrival, you're born disconnected from God, the need meter, but you're left with needs, right? And you're dead in your human spirit because of sin, then you're left to your own devices to utilize the instincts that God has given you to rearrange a life to meet this emptiness that you were born with. And so through years of doing that, you run into emotional responses to life, and you pin up emotions and you get mad at people because they didn't do what you want them to do. And so over time, it just sort of creates this sickness in our life, emotionally and mentally, that even when we get reborn spiritually and get connected back to God through Jesus, we struggle. And so this is where I think the step work is so awesome, especially in my journey, is I fully understood as a young boy that I was a sinner and this separated me from God, and I couldn't get to God because of my unrighteousness. There was nothing good I could do to earn that spot back. And I fully understood why God sent Jesus, who Jesus was, and what he did for me concerning being made right with God. I understood that thoroughly. And the church has done a very good job of, I think, explaining that. Where I would have trouble is even after that authentic experience, I still had thoughts of doing wrong. I still had pictures in my mind of people I was mad at that, stole my joy. And so I didn't know what to do from there, right? And this is where the 12 steps have really helped me to understand salvation concerning the earth, concerning my soul, right? I love that statement. I love that right there. Like salvation, eternity, Jesus, right? The message of the cross is the power of God to those who are being saved. What does that mean? That means those who are trying to transform their mind or take off their grave clothes, this message can heal them internally and give them a decent quality of life here, right? The Holy Ghost was a down payment to get a taste of heaven here on our journey in life that is hard, that have unexpected things, that have problems, that ain't seamless, right? We need the Holy Ghost. And this is a down payment to allow us to experience some times of joy and peace and patience and all these good things while we're on our journey to our full inheritance, which one day would be heaven. So the fourth step is really just help me to win the battle within my soul. And if you've ever, which we all have, but if that one statement relates, win from within, like if you've had the battle of the mind, then that statement right there can hit you hard because you know exactly what I'm talking about. And here's some ways to, even if that don't hit you, to understand it in a way that it could. And I like to explain it through questions. What is typically the battle within? Here's the way I like to describe it. Am I having trouble with personal relationships? Can I not control my emotional natures? Am I a prey to misery and depression? Am I full of fear? Am I unhappy? Do I seem not to be able to make a living? Do I have feelings of uselessness? Do I feel like I can't be of real help to others? That truthfully, their questions can help you determine, right, if I have a soul that is sick. And this has nothing to do with I'm saved. Like you can be born again and still be struggling with those questions. And so I think that the salvation Jesus is talking about in First Corinthians concerning being saved has to do with answering those questions honestly and finding a way to grow mentally and emotionally and overcome those problems so that I could be of service to other people, right? Yes, I want a quality of life, joy, peace, but all that is not necessarily um, for me per se, as much as it is for others who need to lodge in my tree and eat off my fruit. Now, that might have just threw you off because that was an analogy or a parable that you may be thinking, what does that have to do with life or with my life? Well, Jesus uses a parable in the New Testament that says the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. You plant a mustard seed, it's the tiniest of all seeds, right? Goes through this process of being placed in the ground. Obviously, the soil gives it nutrients. You know, the sun, the weather brings the right environment. And over time, you get a breakthrough, something that comes up out of the soil. Eventually, as it continues to be maintained by the gardener, you will find that it becomes the biggest tree of all. And the biggest tree becomes a full mature tree that has fruit, right? And so what Jesus is helping us understand is that one day the birds will lodge in the tree to find rest and shade. And so he's referring the seed to being the Spirit of God within us, that as we begin to let it take residency of our soul and begins to grasp deep roots, we will begin to start to look or bear the image of God, or we will begin to bear fruit. And what happens is the fruit is the place where people come to lodge to eat off our fruit until they get their own. And so the whole ordeal of submitting to God, putting our pieces of our story or pain in God's hands, is so that it can help us to avert death and misery for the sufferer. And so really in this journey of becoming self-aware, we are really equipping ourselves through our own pain to help bring others away from the judgment, away from the pain or the addiction or whatever the case may be. We are really equipping ourselves with the thing in the beginning we don't want nobody to know, to get us to a place where we can reach other people that are right where we were. And so I like that because a lot of times we have trouble going into step 4 because of the guilt or the morbid reflection or the shame or just the fact that I'm unwilling to forgive. But one of the things that helped me to work through that was understanding that the journey was not necessarily for me. The journey was necessary for the next man. And so when I can learn to think of others more than I do myself, and I can embrace situations that particularly ain't personal to me, but are sent to help transform me so that I can be personal to others, when I can live my life in that kind of way, then I'm able to frame situations through the truth of God that empowers me to live my life for others. And I know that for some people right now, thinking that you're going to live your life for others or any of that at step 3 is really out of reach because we're so selfish. But I'm just helping you understand that as I look back, I have started to realize that the journey that I that I started in step 3 was a journey of abandoning myself to God so that I could become a vessel or an agent for his mission. And when I buy into that, my life most of the time is happiness, joyousness, and freedom. And so the only time in 20 years of recovery for me, or almost 20 years, have I not experienced happiness, joyousness, and freedom is typically when I get back into self-will and I live my life for me. When everything now starts to become about me and it comes about what I can get out of life. And when that happens, I run into conflict with people. Why? Because a life ran on self-will is always going to leave you in collision with something or somebody, right? And so we're trying to prepare ourselves in step 3 to know what we're looking for in step 4, right? So I've talked about self. I talked about the basic instincts that make up self. Now I'm going to eventually go into step 4 so that I can inventory this and find the thinking that keeps giving life to my flesh, that keeps getting me trying to do the things only God can do, right? Um, and so I think one thing that I want to make sure that we hit concerning this particular step before we go to 4 um, is just this idea of, because I mean, there's so much going off in my spirit concerning this step, but there's just a few things over the years that I've learned about this step that I think is very necessary for people to be able to take it properly. Because we've always said each step taken properly delivers you to the next. And I think the biggest thing about step 3 is just understanding that the decision I'm making is to follow the instructions in the first 164 pages. And I might not like it, understand it, or want to do it, but in that sequence, I find the power I need to recover, and I get the power I need to help others. And so trying to really simplify step 3 is just I'm making a decision to turn my will and life over to the care of God. And the first step of that decision is a personal inventory, right? And so I just think that step 4 is powerful because it creates self-awareness. And I really feel like that as we're on this journey of God discovery, and if you've listened to me longer than one day, you've probably heard me say this statement hundreds of times. But even as we are on this journey of discovering God in a real deep way, I think that the thing that is equally as important as God discovery is self-discovery. Because of the life we've lived prior to God, we've created defects of character that we tend to lean on even as Christians that can create hurt or harm, guilt, shame, resentment, and fear. And what I have found is that comes from over relying upon self, and that actually blocks me from God, right? And so therefore, it's hard to be used as a vessel when it's clogged. And so self-awareness is one of those things in my journey of God discovery that keeps me from being deceived, thinking that I'm actually doing something from God, but it actually be something that is self-will that actually hurts people. And so the purpose of self-awareness is so that I make sure that I'm keeping my own side of the street clean, because when I get saved, I'm not God. I'm not perfect. And so there are still things that I have to be aware of that could crop up in my life that could be used by the enemy to hurt me or other people, right? And so when I become self-aware, when these things crop up, it's easier for me to understand that ain't of God, that ain't of God, that ain't come from God. I know what this is based on my investigation, and so I've got to ask God to remove this stuff, and I can't do that if I'm not aware of the way that I tick, right? And so as we've, gathered the facts in step 3, we get to this place where now we're at a turning point. It's time to make a decision, right? It's time to actually begin the action that can change my life. So, I hate CJ's not here because he brings also such a beautiful angle in the conversation because I don't know. It's cool because um, we both walk the same journey. We're at different places in the journey, and we both have different perspectives, and it always usually is helpful to bring that angle. And here's the truth. As I probably re-listen to this again, there will be something that crops up in my mind that um, I think about that I wish I would have shared. And the good news about this journey is that we still have the opportunity to share it on down the line. But let's simplify it. And I'm going to repeat some things, so get used to that. I call it the drip method. And so one of the ways that you can really understand a principle or a truth is you've got to keep hearing it, okay? And so here's the truth. Step 1, statement of the problem. Step 2, statement of the solution. Step 3, make a decision to seek the solution that can solve my problem. What is the first step of that decision? An inventory. An inventory, which 9 times out of 10, you've never attempted it. And so if we're going to find a way to heal mentally and emotionally and be an agent or empowered by God to do his will, we're going to have to adopt this principle. And here's the cool thing. I'm going to teach you how to use it. I'm going to show you how to take a personal inventory. I'm going to show you how to treat yourself like a business. And we know all businesses that does not take regular inventory usually goes broke. The bad news, you got to wait till next time. Thank you for tuning in. Till then.